Hey, listener, welcome back to another episode. Today, I want to ask one of the most important questions that we could ever ask ourselves. What do you want? Is that what you really, really want? That's the question we're going to tackle today and all of its implications.
Hey, everybody. Thank you once again for listening to the Jacob Sheriff Podcast today. My name is Josh. I am here with Pastor Jacob and Pastor Hannah, and we are going to talk about what we want today.
Yeah, and just going to call out the obvious that, you know, the song, Tell Me What You Want, what you really, really want. I'm just calling out the obvious, but that actually has a greater emotional, psychological, spiritual implication than I think that song intends.
Danny's secretly just dancing to that song over here while we're recording. So before we get into what we want, I just want to take a minute and ask you, if you have not yet, please leave us a rating or review on iTunes. Those really help us kind of get feedback on what is working, what's connecting, what's not, and also just encourage us to keep recording more because it helps it get in front of more people. So if you have a minute, go ahead and take that minute and leave us a rating or review. We'd really appreciate it. So as far as our icebreaker question this week, not necessarily related to, well, maybe it's related to the topic, but my question for you guys this week, just to help us get to know you a little better, is what is the thing that you do to replenish after you've been drained? I've recently come to this realization that a lot of my work involves thinking and deciding. And when I had some time off recently, I was like, I need to do something that actually is not in that vein to help me like refuel. And so I started doing like household maintenance tasks, like replacing doorknobs.
Holy cow, bro.
Like fixing something on the fence. And like, I'm working with my hands. I'm
adulting.
Like,
hashtag adulting.
Whoa, it was refueling. It was weird.
That's
like
awesome.
Actually doing manual labor apparently is what I needed to be doing. But
I need to get you a cool hat too.
Yeah. I need a hat that says, you know, household chore machine or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
What do you do, honey?
Well, my desire
She's a mom.
would be
it's a little harder for her
to go like by myself to go shopping, but that's kind of dangerous sometimes. But you know what replenishes me like on a daily basis is once everybody's in bed, like getting everything back in order. And again, it's not. I don't have to think about it.
Yeah.
It's
just sort of autopilot kind of thing.
Yep. And just bring order to my house. So that does replenish me because when it's not finished or not done, I don't like going to bed till it's kind of finished. Being outside is really replenishing, especially when the weather's just that perfect chill, but not too hot, not too cold. But not extremely hot. So
April
just
25th.
being
The
outside.
perfect date
from Miss Congeniality.
Miss Congeniality.
Hannah's like, I'm lost.
I'm
I don't
lost.
get this reference.
I didn't know April 25th.
All you need is a light jacket.
There you go. And man, just sitting at a coffee shop is replenishing.
Yeah.
With you, Jacob. So.
Aw. I'm glad I made you go first.
Yeah.
Yes, sitting at a coffee shop talking is very replenishing.
We don't even have to be talking, just kind of sitting there.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah. I agree. The more responsibility I've taken on at work, the more your job is thinking and deciding. And in my case, it includes communicating, speaking. So replenishment is like not talking, like being quiet for long periods of time, not being needed in any way.
Right.
That whatever I'm doing, as long as that can happen. And I've gotten out and done some, we have acreage now. Last year, we moved from a neighborhood. So we have like, I don't know, it was like 20% of an acre, in our neighborhood, lot to now 5 acres. And that came with a lot more yard work than I had originally anticipated. So getting out and doing that. But what I do most of my free days is I like to sit still and be quiet.
Yeah.
I'll I'll listen to ambient music and just read or just think or just like rest in that kind of way, pray. I've
a movie guy too.
And then the like the relax the mind.
Mhm.
Like, or maybe I should say like turn off the mind.
Right.
I like watching movies.
Yeah.
It's movies and not really shows, because then I feel obligated to a whole like
Right.
season of it.
Right.
Can't just watch an episode. Like now I'm
Right.
stuck, and I don't like to get hooked on shows. So I like watching movies. That helps me replenish and unplug.
My favorite thing is hearing him laugh from the movie room.
Yeah.
I'm like, must be
A couple weeks
Must be a
ago,
good movie.
it was
He was
really,
cracking up.
really,
yeah.
really tough. And so on my Sabbath, the kids were still in school, so the kids are all gone. And I decided like this feels like a comedy Sabbath.
It was
So I watched
awesome.
a couple comedies, and oh my gosh, I laughed out loud. I hadn't laughed out loud in a long time.
Yeah.
I laughed out loud multiple times, and I got no problem being by myself laughing out loud.
Yeah.
Like I don't have to be in community to do that.
Yeah. I kept
Yeah.
coming checking on him.
Right.
Like, man,
Like,
must be
what's
pretty
he-
funny in
It
here.
was so
what you
funny.
watching in there?
Yeah.
It was funny.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Mm.
Well, let's go into the topic today. So this morning, before we started recording, we had our staff huddle, and some things were starting to kind of come out of your heart as you were talking to us and helping us kind of see things for our culture, even as a multi-campus church and stuff like that. But this might be maybe a little bonus content that can tag onto your spiritual fight series that you're doing. Let's talk about desire, what we want, how that plays into our behaviors, and basically kind of where do you want to start? Because I mean, this is a big well that we could drown in if we're not careful.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, don't let me monologue on this. I want to have a discussion on it, because this has been a deep realm of thinking for me that I've tried to invest a lot of my thinking. So you know, if you've listened to the podcast, or if you know me, you know things like spiritual disciplines or things like that are a big deal to me. It's something I care deeply about, and it comes from many years ago, a decade ago, just really thinking through the person I was becoming. And instead of focusing on what I'm doing or not doing, who I'm becoming, and that is a lot of what spiritual disciplines are shaping is your character. Well, it's like over a decade of thinking on this and working on it, and not just trying to hack your life. I mean, there's life hacks that you can do that can have a spiritual implication to it. Fine. But that's not primarily what we're after. You're after a life shaped around the grace of God in the person of Jesus Christ. So in thinking about that, the person I'm becoming, trying to like reverse engineer, well, where does character, like what constitutes character?
right,
What constitutes character is your natural habits, the habits that shape your reactions. So your character is a combination of the decisions you make consciously and the reactions you have unconsciously. And all of that is built on your habits that are built on repetitive actions. So your repeated actions. Well, then, like, how do you repeat actions? Well, that comes into your thoughts and your decision-making capacities. And then I was thinking, like, what informs those? How deep can we go on seeing this? And I would say towards the center, towards the depths. I don't know if it's the deepest part of you, but I would say near the depths is your desire. Your desire shapes what you want, will shape what you do. So our decision-making capacities, or our will, and our desires, I don't know if they sit one on top of the other, but they're pretty close to parallel with one another. They're right next to each other with the decisions that I make can be shaped by my desires, and my desires can be shaped by the repetitive decisions I make. So I've just been thinking a lot on desire, and when I'm on a series when this is being recorded, and a series on Sundays on a spiritual fight. And honestly, I just decided to just start the subject. I didn't have a clear map in my head of what all I want to say, because I just feel like I need to get this idea out in front of our congregation, because we are in a spiritual fight. And my dad's taught on some of these things, but I feel like it needs a fresh take on it, a fresh communication about it,
Right.
getting it fresh on people's minds. And one of the things that just I started tracking in is the world, the flesh, and the devil. And I didn't get to it in one of my messages, but just thinking through how desires constitute like the flesh, and how what we have with our deepest desires versus our strongest desires, been thinking on, and then how those get shaped. And the verse that I didn't get to, that I was going to get to on Sunday, is James chapter 1, verse 12 to 15. James says this: "Blessed is the man who remains steadfast under trial, for when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life, which God has promised to those who love him. Let no one say when he is tempted, I am being tempted by God, for God cannot be tempted with evil, and he himself tempts no one. But each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desire. Then desire, when it is conceived, gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is fully grown, brings forth death." So I was just thinking on like the phrase I started saying in a few ways as I've been thinking about this is you sin because you want to.
Right.
When we're thinking about like what makes us sin, say, well, it just happened to me, or I didn't really want to do that. And that's not true. You sin, whatever that is, whether it be big or small, we sin because we want to, and it comes from a desire. We want to do certain things. We want certain things. We want to feel certain things. And it is those desires that I think a lot of our internal battle is between our desires that are shaped by God, our desires, you could say those the deepest desires, and those in competition with your strongest desires, or Scripture sometimes uses the word craving, the cravings we have of the flesh, that we might want strong abs, but we also want or crave sugar.
Right.
And so, well, you want both.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, which one are you consciously paying attention to and wanting to meet? That there's desires. What do you really want? Most people don't think carefully about what they really want. Do you want a happy marriage? Do you really want that? Do you want a life that fulfills that fulfills God's plans and purposes? Do you want a life that brings pleasure to the Lord? Do you want to witness of the character of Jesus? A lot of times we don't really think about that. Then you have to see, well, then what are the desires that are cravings that you're having? Is it for food? We all have a natural craving for food. That's hunger's part of it. But our hungers or our cravings for food overtaking the boundaries of what is healthy? You can want a healthy marriage, and then you can crave to look at pornography. There's these two that work against one another. And the problem is that we want both. Mm-hmm. Now we have to ask, okay, well, which desires are being shaped by the Holy Spirit, and which cravings or desires are the flesh that the devil can have a foothold in? And what James is saying here is you have these desires, they're in you. And if you allow them to be conceived, he uses the process of conception, birth, and maturity. When you allow those desires to be conceived, which means you don't just have them, you give in to them. He says, when it's conceived, it gives birth to sin. So when you give in to those desires repetitively, it gestation? It gestates, and comes into sin. And then if you let that sin have enough growth, it will lead to a death of some kind. So I've just been thinking about like, okay, well then what are people's strongest desires that are making them make unwise decisions? What about me? What strongest desires am I giving into for food or bad attitude or the way I communicate to my children, or these things that are my strongest desires that I'm doing that I know aren't right, but I give into them, that I need to become aware of them first. And then I need to form habits that encourage me giving in to my deepest desires that the Lord puts inside of me, Philippians chapter 2 says, it is God who works in you both to will or desire and to fulfill that which pleases him. So I know God's put in desires in my heart. So how do I become more aware of those and then consciously form habits around giving into those desires that please the Lord, and those actions and decisions over a long period of time shape my character around life versus giving into these strong desires that are cravings that if I give into them long enough, it's sin. And then that sin, if I don't stop it, if I don't curb that, if I don't start repenting and acting away from that, it will eventually lead to a death. So you can take things like pornography, that there's a desire to see these things that feel the stimulus. And then you give into that long enough, it becomes sin. And that sin can lead to a division in your marriage that could end up being a death. That a lot of affairs don't begin with a desire for an extramarital affair. It begins with something else. From a male side and from a female side, there's a desire for attention that maybe your husband isn't giving you. And then if you give into that with someone long enough, you can find your heart, your desires going toward another person, and that becomes sin. And that sin gives birth to a death in your marriage. And it doesn't begin with because people just want to be divorced or have an extramarital affair. Mm-hmm. So it's the more we can pay attention to those desires and are giving into those desires, the more we can see how God's life can flourish or how death comes out in our lives. And one is a foothold for the devil that can move towards death, and one is a potential for the character of Christ to be formed in us. So that's just kind of my initial just summary of what's been on my mind with desires.
Yeah. Let's kind of dive into the contrast between strongest desires and deepest desires, because what kind of is resonating with me, even hearing what you're saying, is even like the situation you brought up about pornography, like the temptation there isn't, or I think what people have going on is a lack of recognition of what the real need is that they're trying to meet.
Right.
And so there's a desire for intimacy and connection, but the means to get there, they're not willing to go through the pain. So like the deepest desire is intimacy, and is connection, is emotional fulfillment. Like the things that we experience in marriage that God ordained and designed inside of marriage for us to be able to share that closeness and that intimacy with another person. It's like a shortcut that is trying to achieve that, but in the whole process is actually aborting what it takes to actually get there. And so the stronger desire tends to outweigh the deepest desire because we're not recognizing the difference. Like I think that's it's the way our culture is even wired, is to prey on those desires, like advertisements. It's good. Like the reason those things are so prominent is because we fall prey to them so easily.
Oh yeah.
And that we have to wake up to an awareness of how our behavior ultimately, comes to fruition, and like recognizing that process you talked about of desire, and then that becomes a decision, that becomes behavior, that becomes a habit, that becomes our character. Like figuring out that process and recognizing why these things repeat themselves. And we can even cognitively know, like, this is a bad choice. And in the moment we know, and are telling ourselves, this is a bad choice, but the desire is still so overwhelming that we can't overcome a strong desire with good intention. Like there's something out of balance there. And that usually that becomes that way because of small compromises
Yeah.
in previous decisions, and we haven't developed our willpower or even our recognition and connection to the Holy Spirit to sort of wake us up in that moment.
Right.
Yeah.
And so the people get locked into these cycles of bad choice after bad choice, repeated sin, repeated
Mhm.
behavior, and no amount of just willpower in the moment is ever going to be enough to unlock or to open the key to that prison that you've locked yourself in. And so it's not even just necessarily even about like bad desires as well, like or like grievous sins, like the bad habit of just being a like consumer who's just buying stuff all the time, or just like, I know the better choice in this moment isn't to turn on the TV and watch 8 shows in a row, you know, but I don't have a desire to do the thing that long-term is going to benefit me more. I'm choosing instead to go for that short-term fulfillment.
Yeah.
And it's so fleeting. It's like cotton candy, you know, it's like, oh, it tastes good. And then it's gone.
Yeah.
But what would actually result in me feeling better over time is choosing the nutritious option.
Yeah.
But I don't get that immediate. It's that instant gratification. Like
that
there's,
plays into it.
we live in a culture that not only is trying to prey on those desires, is also trying to redefine what good and evil is. And so rather than recognizing and being honest about what the results of those decisions are, they're trying to redefine and reshape reality around these lies of like, no, actually, that is not good for you. Like it's really bad advice to go this direction. And in our culture, like even calling good evil and evil good is like, it's the norm nowadays. You just can't even call something out for what it is. But so that's me kind of rambling for a little bit, but Hannah, what do you think about desires and how you've kind of see those play out in your life?
Or how do you feel?
How do you feel? How do you think? Or how do you feel?
Yeah, this is good stuff. Just listening to you guys. I immediately kind of call to mind the scripture in Proverbs about guarding your heart with all diligence, because out of it flows the issues of life. And I think heart there is talking about, you know, those desires and those emotional things, your mind, all of those things. And so I think you said something there, Josh, is if we're not aware of how to even kind of rise above the desires to see them for what they are, then that's where we can get locked into these habits and cycles of unhealth. But even in that, I mean, my mind went to some parenting things, you know, with kids. And of course, I have to work on this in my own life, but I can see it in small scales, you know, in my kids of there may be a weakness or a temptation in each one of them for certain things, and being able to parent them through those things. Some of them maybe just be they love sugar, and that's seems so harmless, but recognizing that teaching them how to have healthy habits, just even around something simple like that, is actually putting in them the discipline to know how to discern desires later that could be more detrimental, you know? And then some may be emotional outrage or whatever, and recognizing again that I like how you said the strong desire, the deep desire, being able to really see it for what it is and help get to some of the roots of where that's coming from. And what you actually desire is not this. And it's a process of even renewing your mind to the truth, going back to that truth over lies, you know, kind of conversation. So this is all really good stuff. So,
well, like the wisdom of the world would tell us that whatever you want is right. And it's so, or I mean, you know, be true to yourself is one of the phrases that you hear all the time. Like
follow your heart,
follow your desires, follow your dreams, you know, all this stuff that's on Disney, you know, it's like a Disney quotes village, you know, it's like, hey, this is the story that we're telling, this, be true to yourself and everything's going to work out well. But the reality is that we don't know what we want a lot of times. Sometimes we want two things at the same time that are the opposite.
Yeah.
Like you mentioned, like I want to have a 6-pack, but I also want to eat that, that giant plate of cupcakes right there. I want both. But
red velvet.
Yeah. Red velvet, cream cheese, icing. Yeah. Anyway, we're getting distracted. But recognizing the difference between the long-term desire and the short-term distraction. Like there's like, we're almost trained as a culture to always try to find the easy way, or to always try to find like the shortcut,
the path with the least resistance,
the path of least resistance.
Yeah.
And the truest part of who we are, especially after we've accepted Jesus and he's put those new desires in us, is like those things have to be cultivated and mined out. And they have to be like, it's why things like spiritual disciplines are so important, is because it's not about like getting the willpower in and of ourselves or mind over matter or any of this stuff. It's like, it's a recognition of who we are, like understanding the role of our flesh and how it entices us and how it wants to be pleased and coddled, and we just want to feel good, and we just all of these things that we want in the short term. Like there's a deeper level that God, that is in sync with what our Creator actually created for us and what He created us to be and to want. And it points to our purpose. It points to our like His intent for us and for humans, like for flourishing. And when we don't have a clear picture of what God's desire is, we can be so easily distracted by the things that we want. That just, I'm just reflecting even in my own like life, like the times where I am most unaware or most detached, I think is maybe a better word, from what it is that God really wants for me, is when I'm most easily susceptible to falling prey to these desires that like they're things that I know are even wrong in the moment, and I choose to make the bad choice because I'm not giving ear to what the Holy Spirit is saying, or I'm choosing in the moment to ignore what I know is wisdom and choosing the foolish part because I'm just in that place of like, I don't care what the right thing is. I just want what I want.
Yeah.
And when you're in that place over and over and over, like you find yourself at a place of like, I don't know how to get out of this.
Yeah. And how did I get here?
How did I get here? And so at some point in this conversation, we need to turn to like, how do we, when we find ourselves there, how do we get out of there? But I think it's probably worth still just talking and recognizing how desires work. And
well, I'd say as an adult, one of the more significant growths, or one of the things learning that has meant a lot to my spiritual formation has been to learn how the brain works. That the brain has different chemicals that fire at different times for different things. And those cause certain feelings, feelings as like an emotional reality, but then things that are a chemical reality in our brain. And when it comes to short-term like feelings of pleasure, I believe it's dopamine. There's dopamine and there's serotonin, and I might be flipping these. So if anybody knows exactly what this is, you can tell me if I flipped it. But our immediate desires are for that feeling of dopamine, which has a sense of pleasure. It fires not just with pleasure, but with a sense of like happy. It's what we would equate to happy feelings. So, when we're feeling down, the desire for ice cream is because we know that eating ice cream will fire that dopamine. Or when we see a text message come across, or a like, or a series of likes or comments on our social media posts, those will fire dopamine because we have this sense of, oh, someone's paying attention to me, or I'm needed. It's weird how even things as simple as notifications on our phone fired little hits of dopamine. Or you go more illicit and go things like pornography or drugs. What is firing among other chemicals is dopamine. And here's the deal, man, it's easy and we like it. So it could be some things that are somewhat innocuous, like some sugar, or somewhat illicit, like drugs. But it's firing a chemical that we really like feeling. Mm-hmm. And those are the strong desires that we have. Then there's a deeper chemical fire around hormone around serotonin, which that is where our deep sense of connection comes from, our sense of fulfillment, where joy is, where a sense of peace comes. So things like marriage, what's supposed to happen is the hard work of intimacy is to fire serotonin. And in a man's brain, sex will fire the different hormones that are for deep connection and a sense of protection. So in a male's brain, sexual intimacy will fire the kinds of things needed to grow in our sense of protection over our family or over our marriage or our relationships. It's a relational thing that connects. And so when you combine that with emotional intimacy and a spiritual intimacy, it forms these deep bonds. Those are our deepest desires. So we can have a craving for pornography and a desire for emotional connection, and they happen simultaneously. But the one for the immediate hit of dopamine is actually the stronger one because it's easier.
Yeah.
And so when we make the decision, because at that point now, you can make a decision. You're not an animal that is just firing on instinct. We can make the decision to engage in something that fires that dopamine. It will have an effect. And if it's, one slice or half a slice of red velvet cake and cream cheese icing, okay, I got that little hit. That was that little sense of dopamine. I feel good. And it's not going to really hurt me, but you get used to that kind of dopamine firing. Well, I'll go for more and I'll have more and I'll have it every day. Mm-hmm. And what happens is, our brain working is just incredible. The different neurons and chemicals that fire at the same time, your brain is looking for an easy way out. When you make things fire at the same time repetitively, it makes it easier. Mm-hmm. And that's where habits come from, is not because you're just committing to a certain action repetitively, though that's part of it. It's that you're getting a certain sense of fulfillment or pleasure or delight in this repetitively. And your brain is running that track. It's like clearing a road or a path in the woods. As soon as you're doing it repetitively, it makes it easier to traffic later. And so you can go wandering in the woods and you might be able to make your way through, but it's harder. You clear a path, you follow a trail, it's easier. Mm-hmm. And that's what your brain's doing all the time. Mm-hmm. Just as simple as your way to work. It doesn't matter what the easiest route is or the quickest route is. It's whichever route we've taken consistently is the route we will take. And that's where, I've had this. So when I was younger and before we were married, you guys lived in Durant and I lived in Kingston. And part of me winning the heart of my future wife was I had to invest a lot of time at you guys' house. Yep. And so I come into your house all the time and every evening and they're late and I'm sometimes driving in the dark. And where I lived was about a 25-minute drive from Durant, from you guys' house. And I'm like 19, 20 years old. And I'll pull into my driveway so this is 25 minutes. I'll pull into my driveway and have this recognition. I don't remember driving. Yeah. I do not remember driving here. And that's because you drive that's a certain way. Mm-hmm. You get used to the mechanics of driving and then you drive a certain path. You almost do it without thinking. And that's why when something irregular happens, like a car pull out in front of you, you have a immediate fight or flight, like immediate reaction, faster than you can consciously think to make that decision. That's how your amygdala works, is that it's that fight or flight, processing information 1,000 times faster than your prefrontal cortex that's making decisions. You're making those instinctive decisions. And so your brain's doing that with everything. Well, what if you could shape it in the direction of Christ-like character?
Right.
What if you could get firing together, reading scripture, fasting, prayer, and get those habits that do not have a dopamine hit. They're not going to have that sense of pleasure initially, but you do it repetitively and you create a track in your brain that can fire a lot quicker, a lot easier over the course of time. Those actions giving into the deeper desires that aren't as strong craving like something else is, then now all of a sudden your repetitive actions have become habits, and your habits are actually moving you in the direction of Christ likeness, towards love and joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. You don't have the willpower for self-control. Your self-control is a very finite resource. And honestly, you deplete it very early in the day, every day. So you need something beyond your own willpower to overcome the cravings or the desires of the flesh. And what John, the Apostle John, says in 1 John 2, he says, all that's in the world are the desires or cravings of the flesh, the desires or cravings of the eyes, and the pride of life. That's the track everybody else is running on, and it will be a whole lot easier to give into that track. And everything in our world is conspiring to get us to get that immediate hit. And they might not have initially had a nefarious agenda in that, but I remember listening to a guy, now I can't remember his name off the top of my head. He's called, what is he called? The conscience of Silicon Valley. Tristan Harris, I believe. And he was talking about how there's like 100 psychologists employed by Silicon Valley, by different tech companies, and their whole job is to create addicts. Like their whole job is to combine how this piece of technology works with our brain to get us hooked, because right now we have an attention economy. It's not just a financial economy, it's an attention economy. So things like on your social media feed, videos that autoplay, that wasn't that way at first. Right. But there was some psychologists that knew if you will autoplay the video, it fires in your brain a certain chemical reaction that makes you want to watch the rest of it. And you do that over time. It's addiction. Things like notifications, that little ding, buzz, or whatever, it's sending the signal to your brain. Oh, I'm important. Someone needs me. Right. There's a need. I need to meet. Right. Or hey, there's something going on. I got a fear of missing out.
Just something new.
Yeah.
Something like to
and
break the boredom.
And all of that is appealing to the lowest form of your brain. Yeah. It's appealing to your amygdala, fear. So anything that can make you afraid will make you addicted. You'll be hooked on it, because it's not that you like the feeling of fear, is that your brain easily feels fear. And so you give into it, you become afraid. You do that over a long period of time. You are an anxious person. You are a worried person. You are a fearful person. It's become your character. And all that comes from, that's why news stations are going to prey on your sense of self-righteousness. They're going to prey on your fears. They're going to prey on your cravings, advertisements. Why do you think, like, no menu? None of us have ever looked at a menu and saw something. Oh, that looks so good. And then the real thing is exactly the picture you saw. Right. It's this never happens. Yeah. But what those pictures are doing on the menu, what those videos are doing on the advertisements, the food in slow motion kind of deal.
Yeah. And most of it's all fake and plastic in those videos.
Yeah. It's appealing to a craving that's inside of you. And it's trying to fire. So it's like everything in the world is conspiring to get you to give into your base cravings for food, pleasure, sex, attention. That's what everything around you is structured. And to be a disciple of Jesus now in a world of technology will become harder at that. Now, there's things, I don't think it's harder for us to be Christians today than it was, 500 years ago in the Dark Age or the Middle Ages or 1,000 years ago, or 2,000 years ago in Rome.
Right.
I don't think it's harder. It's just a different kind of hard. The different kind of hard is going to come down to which desires do I give in the most to? Do I give in to my cravings? And whatever those are, if I do that repetitively, will become an addiction or a habit. And that habit will start shaping my character. Or will I choose to be aware of those, say no to the appropriate ones, or not now to some of them, and give in or activate my deeper desires. So things like fasting makes no sense if you don't have a certain goal. The only way fasting makes sense to the world is if you have a goal of being thinner or looking better, or you're needing attention or something. That's the only way fasting makes sense to the world, because there has to be some initial craving that you're giving into. But in a Christian sense, like, it's not meal replacement. It's not weight loss strategy. It's not diet. It's simply saying no to that desire for food so that I can say yes to a deeper desire.
Yeah.
Right.
The deeper, we have to surface those deeper desires because there's nothing in our world that's pulling them out.
Yeah.
So we have to pay attention to that consciously. We have to recognize the desires that move us in the wrong direction and create structures and habits and boundaries to say no to them so that we can say yes to the deeper desires. Food might not be an issue for someone, but anger might be the issue there. Well, it's because anger fires, it fires so many things in your brain that makes you feel awesome momentarily.
Right.
You feel powerful because it activates a lot of muscles. You feel powerful. You feel strong. You feel superior. If you can, through anger, control someone's behavior, ooh, man, you feel awesome for an extremely brief period of time. And then comes, if you have a conscience, then comes the regret.
Right.
And it's like, can we preempt the regret by, in a sense, knowing what I'm about to do is going to cause regret?
Yeah.
So I'm going to stop it and I'm going to let my brain settle down. We need a little bit of time. You need oxygen in the brain. Your amygdala is firing. You need oxygen in the brain. You need to strengthen gratitude because you can't be grateful and afraid or angry at the same time. So you got to activate gratitude, and a habit of gratitude will now make you less habitually angry. You give in to anger. Guess what you're doing? You're creating a path for anger. That's a lot easier to be angry later. And you do it again and again and again. It'll be even easier and easier and easier until you're just an angry person.
Right.
And that's something we're teaching our kids about sadness. It's okay to feel sad. It's not okay to give into sadness so repetitiously that you are a sad person. It's okay to feel anger. You're going to feel anger at different times in your life. It's not sin to feel anger. It is wrong to give into your anger and use it to inflict harm on your siblings or whatever. And it's like, we're teaching our kids these things. And it's like, we as adults have to wake up to that.
Yeah. I mean, the role of parents are to provide boundaries and constraint to uncontrolled, disordered desires. Like
That's
our
good.
kids, they don't have the recognition or the capability sometimes to decide what is right in the moment because they haven't developed the maturity. Well, we as adults, we
have to constantly be on that journey.
Yeah. And yet the world is making us children.
Exactly. And we have to recognize the game that's being played and the strategies that are being employed against us, and have the wisdom to partner with the Holy Spirit and to engage in these spiritual disciplines that counter these things. So when we talked earlier about we want to recognizing this is only half of the equation. Like we have to understand what's going on, and then and counter those strategies with other strategies. Let's talk about fasting for a minute. I'm awful at fasting, and it's a recognition that I've come to to recognize just recently. Like, I'm not even necessarily driven a lot by hunger. Sometimes the days will go by and I'm just like, oh, I forgot to eat today. So it's not that, but the
meal skipping
is not hard. It's intentionally denying myself or deciding I'm going to fast. And then instantly, my flesh rises up and is like, no, you need to eat. No, you need this bag of chips, or even just like autopilot subtly, like walking through the house and I'm on a fast and I'm like, got the chip bag halfway open, got my hand in there and I'm putting the chip. What am I doing? How did this happen?
Yeah.
And
at the fridge,
you're at the fridge
looking inside, knowing you're fasting, and yet you're sitting here looking at whatever tastes good.
And I think the temptation a lot of times, especially with fasting, is to have some sort of like martyr mentality of like, look what I'm doing. Like I'm so, I don't know. Maybe this is me just confessing my sins in front of the world, but
do you need absolution?
Yeah. Like having this kind of attitude of like, I'm earning something, or I'm performing to get something.
Yeah.
And the reality of fasting is it's about self-denial. It's about telling your flesh no, recognizing that you have the ability to say no to yourself.
Yeah.
And practicing that ability in something small like food.
Right.
Or in other habits of abstaining from something for a period of time, like saying no and having somebody say no to you, whether it's yourself or whether it's an accountability partner or whoever it is, we need that.
Yeah.
We have to have that. We have to hit up against those boundaries, just like kids have to have boundaries to say, no, you can't have that sweet right now.
Yes.
No, you can't play with that until you clean this other thing up. Like our job as parents is to be that boundary for our kids so that they, not just so that we control their behavior in a positive way, but we're actually instilling the ability in them to control their will, to have self-control, to recognize the results of bad choices in the moment so that they don't have to feel those consequences later when they're grown-ups, hopefully not just grown-ups in body, but in mind. They have the maturity to recognize like, no, I don't need this extra thing right now.
Yeah.
No, I don't need to spend my money on that right now. Yes, I do need to invest because in the future, I'm going to need that, or things. I mean,
like the only time where, there's not tons of significant differences between our children and animals.
Yeah,
like I mean, there's obviously some significant differences, but I mean, at a base level, children have very little ability to not operate on some form of instinct, some sort of pleasure seeking. They don't have that ability. And so it's children that we say don't have self-control. And yet we have an entire culture built on shaming self-control.
Yeah.
I mean, there's some of the, like the advertisements about body positivity. It's like what sounds like a noble thing, that the ultimate idea of beauty is not some, paper thin model, but you have people advertising the lack of self-control and saying that's being body positive. Well, no, that's still being a poor role model. Being paper thin and your life being controlled by, anorexia, that's not good either. So the world does not have a positive thing to offer to us. But it's children that we say give in to they don't have self-control. And yet our whole political system is structured, and not just one side of the political party. The political system is built on giving into your base desires. From a policy standpoint, we give the people what they want. From a leader standpoint, a leader will just activate your base fears, your base desires. And that's how they win. That's our whole marketing system is built on the lack of self-control. And so like it's children. And we're a bunch of adult babies. That's what, and like as Christians, if we don't offer an alternative, a Christ-like alternative, not just discipline, professional athletes have a significant amount of discipline. They have they'll fast. They have a highly structured diet, a very disciplined workout routine, all that stuff. But for what purpose? So it's not like there isn't discipline in the world. There's plenty of it. It's just, what is it? What kind of character is it being formed? And there's not tons of athletes that have a high form of character where the discipline has turned into character. It's usually coaches that used to be players that end up having that kind of character. I think of, I just watched the Mavs win in 7, which I'm super excited about. But one of the things I'm a little sad about is that the coach for the Phoenix Suns Monty Williams, who won Coach of the Year this year, truly is a man of character. That's a man of character. Used to be a player. He lost his wife 6 years ago in a car accident and showed just profound character in the midst of that. So there are models, but guess what? He's a Christian and he turned his discipline toward Christ likeness.
Yeah.
And this is my problem with the American church is we either give in to some theology of the world, some philosophy of the world, or trying to be an alternative, we just become mean and self-righteous. And it's like, I believe that the future church is going to be built on the ones that know how to structure their life through spiritual disciplines around the character of Christ. And at its very base, at the basic level is beginning with an awareness of cravings versus your deepest desires, and then activating spiritual disciplines that get us in touch with the fruits of the Spirit. So things like fasting is practicing self-control until you bear the fruit of self-control.
Right.
In the same way, peace is recognizing when I get angry or afraid or anxious. Practicing peace over a long period of time can help you bear the fruit of peace. Paul gives us in Philippians 4, like what we do. Don't be anxious for anything, but instead pray about everything through prayer, supplication, thanksgiving. We make our requests named to God, and then the peace of Christ will fill our hearts and minds. So the discipline is to learn how to pray and how to be grateful. And you do that over a long period of time while the peace is governing you. Eventually you become a person of peace. You bear the fruit of peace. And like, we're just going to have, not everything's going to happen instantaneously, as much as, some preachers are promising an easy life and, instant fruit. But I'm sorry, anything instant in the food world isn't good. It's not good for you. And so fruit takes time to bear, and that's going to happen through spiritual disciplines. There's just no way around it. And that's going to be the future of the American church, is going to be whether or not enough people live a life of spiritual disciplines that they end up bearing the fruit of the Spirit in the character of Christ.
Yeah. And I think in context with the fasting, you can look at it with food, but really it's what should we fast that our desires have got out of control? And it's a way to bring self-control back into your life, And so though food is one of the main ways, I think that there's other intentional seasons where fasting is good and necessary to be able to bring balance back, into your life.
Like turning off or cutting off access to the triggers that result in the bad behavior, like taking time away from your phone, parenting your phone. I think that term, like put it to bed before you and don't wake and let it sleep in. Like don't immediately wake up and grab your phone and, get sucked into the spiral of distraction. And
I've been trying to practice that. I got a sunrise alarm. I don't know if you've ever seen those. I highly recommend them. Any listener that wants them. I'm not getting any.
The thing I love most about this time of year is that it gets brighter, faster.
Yes.
But general.
I set, because we need our children to see devices in a separate room. That's one of our rules. No devices in rooms. I want to model that for them. So I have my charge station in the office in our house, and been practicing this where I get up with an alarm, like an actual alarm, not my phone alarm. And I don't touch my phone until there's a certain series of things I need to do before I touch my phone. Now, the only thing that I do still figuring out, is this a good habit / craving or a bad one, is opening the YouVersion Bible app to ensure my streak continues. I think that's a good desire, but I also know it's a gateway to my phone that has other things that are not good. So but I do that in the morning, and then I'm working on that habit, but I've been trying to practice that. I don't use my phone as an alarm, because when my kids all will have phones at some point in time, we're going to have pretty darn strict rules, and I want to model it for them before that. That's one of our rules with our daughter, who has an iPod. She doesn't have a phone. She's not ready for it, but she has an iPod Touch, and it doesn't sleep in your room.
Yep.
It doesn't go to your room. It goes here. And we'll have it where it's charged, and I have it set where it doesn't overcharge. So I have all that stuff set. But that's one of the things that I'm having to practice, because I know that my phone, it has a gravitational pull to it.
Right.
And it's not bad in the sense of there's bad things on the phone. It's more like it's just not good. It's
Mhm.
not, I'm getting caught in whatever news that I'm
Sure.
reading too much of, or
My
social
thing
media
is
feed
getting
or-
sucked into deals. So like I collect pocket
think about
knives or
Amazon is built on a
Yeah.
framework of like making
Yep.
you happy. 2-day shipping,
Mhm.
man. If it's any longer,
Yeah.
I had an order get canceled, and I was like being all self-righteous about it. Like, who do you think you are, canceling my order and not getting it to me in 2 days? Like, that's not real Christ likeness right there.
Yeah. So I think we have to have those. We have to have the margin to process and make room to gain the awareness.
Yeah.
The awareness of how our desires are affecting us.
Mhm.
So like recently, I was able to take a couple of days off, and I re-listened to or reread "Ruthless Elimination of Hurry" by John Mark Comer. I'd recommend it to anybody who's feeling anxious and
Yeah.
just hurried, and that life is just out of control.
Absolutely.
And going through that again really helped me kind of recognize, oh wow, no wonder I'm feeling this the way that I'm feeling. I've stopped doing some of the habits that I learned even from that book that were
Mhm.
contributing to peace, that
Yeah.
were contributing to,
Yeah.
and whenever we're healthy people and we're not being driven like mad to, from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next, there's margin all of a sudden to have time to gain the awareness of, oh, this is why I'm behaving that way. This is
Yeah.
why I keep making that
Yeah.
decision. This is how I feel. That puts me in a vulnerable place to choose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It heightens the desire
Yeah.
For something that I don't need or I don't want, that is resulting in death in my
Yeah.
life, or sin or death or whatever. And I think it's so important that these habits that we're intentional about creating, we recognize like their value isn't them and of themselves. It's they're preparing the ground, and they are making space for the fruit to actually be born.
Yeah.
Like it's, a farmer doesn't get fruit by simply preparing the soil. Like there still has
Mhm.
to be
Yeah.
seed planted. There still has to be water. But
Yeah.
if he doesn't prepare the soil, like no matter what you put in it,
Right.
Mhm.
nothing's going to grow, or
Mhm.
whatever grows is just pure luck and random. Like there's two parts to that equation. Like it's all part of a different process. And so like spiritual disciplines or fasting or different things like this, they put us in a place to like, we're making decisions that are within our control, so that when we're faced with temptations or things that are beyond our ability to deny just on our own,
Yeah.
like we've got the fruit
Mhm.
then, and the partnership with the Holy Spirit to make the right choice
Yeah.
on something that's more difficult. I forget how it's phrased, but it's like we're choosing to say no to food so that later, when the heat is on, we can say no
Mhm.
to pornography.
Mhm.
Or we're choosing in this moment to deny ourselves, short pleasure that maybe if you just look at it on its own is not a big deal.
Right.
So that later, when we're really faced against it and we're stressed and we're overwhelmed, we have the discipline necessary to say no to the
Because
right
we're
things.
we can be pretty vulnerable in places and times when we're tired,
Mhm.
physically and mentally tired, when we're overwhelmed, when we're busy and in a hurry, we're vulnerable to attack. And the question at that point will be, well, do you have the habits and character when you're vulnerable that will be automatic when you're not consciously choosing it?
Yeah.
That's what I've discovered. I don't. I often don't have what it takes. And so I have to keep the work. And I'm the same with you. I've recently gotten busy and hurried, and a lot of my habits are off,
Mhm.
and spiritual disciplines, they're off. And I'm in a season where I'm reworking them and in a new reality, a new
Mhm.
world, moving disrupted all of our habits, and it takes time. And I'm not going to be condemning, but I also am not going to be lazy about it when I want to be. That's what my immediate gratification is to be lazy.
Yeah. I don't want to think about what I should be doing. I want to just not think. Leave me alone.
There you
Yep.
go.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's a desire
Mhm.
that isn't coming from a healthy place. And like having the space, I mean, just those 2 days, like I know it's just 2 days, but they really felt like, it felt like 2 weeks, just miraculously, thank God, that I really went into those days like I need to decompress, not just like have some time to veg out on stuff. Like there's like indulging the flesh.
Yeah.
And just indulging in the things that I want isn't actually rejuvenating. I asked that question at the beginning, like what actually rejuvenates us? We have to recognize that what we want in the moment often isn't what we need.
Right.
And having the wisdom to choose, even though it may not be the strongest thing that we want right then, knowing that the choice that's going to lead to the deepest satisfaction, we have to give ourselves space, and we have to have accountability. We have to have friends and people who love us to help encourage us, not isolate ourselves from people, and have people ask us, "Hey, did you make the right choice?" Like I had a conversation with Austin a few days before I took that time off, and he just, in typical Austin fashion, he's like, we were talking about the time I was going to get to take, and just he gave me some podcasts to listen to and a few different things, and he's like, "So, what are you going to do on those 2 days?" I'm like, well, I know what I don't need to do. And I started listening. I don't need to just go and play video games for 8 hours. I don't need to go go just watch TV. I need to, and he's like, all right, so what are you going to do? And so just that little bit of challenge and accountability was helpful, just to, what, I need to decide now when I know I can make the right decision, because in the day of, I'm going to be tempted to not follow through. Yeah. I need to decide now when I have the willpower and I'm in the right space, so that the decision's already been made. I don't have to make it later. Yeah. So.
I realized fasting was really difficult if my wife's not doing it with me. So we had to start deciding how we're going to fast together.
Yep.
Otherwise there's just no accountability. I have the same trigger that everybody else has. Well, you don't want to be religious.
Yeah.
I'm going to eat because my wife did such a good job making dinner, and I need to be gracious and give my kids a good example. So
I know something for myself, that because this is very much hitting home to me, as you mentioned, we've moved, and like you have to find new spaces for all your things. And at the time of this recording, we've just hit summertime. So just been spending time on how do we function as a family in summer, when kids are home all the time.
Because we haven't had summer in this house yet.
Yeah. And so I found myself, like you said, wanting to just fold at those quick fixes of desire. But something that I recognize is, what are the words coming out of my mouth, and with that, I'm constantly telling the kids, your words carry power. So even in this conversation and what we're talking about, I think prayer to the Lord around desire is super important. And something I constantly am praying is, Lord, let my desires be your desires, or, cultivate your desires in me. And I think that whenever we're in seasons where we're almost being overcome by the wrong desires, whether that be super sinful things, or just I'm eating stuff I don't need to eat, or we're going through fast food way more than, so our spending's out of alignment. All of those things is, I think, one first step is to be able to consciously speak about that in prayer, and allow it to at least begin.
Bringing it out into the light, with like in prayer, or with another person saying, hey, look, this is something that I'm struggling with, and I need you to hold me accountable in a loving way, and ask me how are you doing?
Yeah.
Like, that's so helpful. It's so uncomfortable, especially for introverts.
Yeah.
Like
but
myself,
even like when you're hearing yourself say, I'm tired all the time. I have one kid, that's all I feel like she's telling me lately. And I'm like, okay, so if that's the way you feel, then what habits are fixing, those things? And I think we can do that for ourselves, you know? Okay, if I don't like the way my clothes are fitting me, then I can talk about it, but will I make steps to changing those things? So anyway.
Be not deceived. God is not mocked. Whatsoever a man sows, that he will reap. Whatever a man eats, he will gain. Anyway.
Yes. Good try.
It's a paraphrase.
And that's back to the original question, is what do you really want?
Yeah.
Yeah.
because when you start becoming aware, okay, I have wants. All right. Well, do I really want to eat like I'm eating? Because in the moment I do, but is that what I really want? And so trying to tap into those deepest desires is a lot of the work of the heart and mind when it comes to, especially as as you get out of young adulthood, when your life actually is beginning to narrow with family, with job, as that life narrows, you need to be really cognizant of what are those deepest desires. That's where a lot of now I've been pastoring young adults that have gone from the life is all dreamy and open possibilities to I have in my case, I'll speak to a lot of young men. I have a wife, I have kids, I have a job, and it's all good, but there's something missing. And at that point, you're like, well, you don't need to be missing your young body. You need to find out what your deepest desires are, and are the way you're structuring your life moving you towards your deepest desires. Now that you have more responsibilities, and as you've gotten more responsibilities, you have to recognize, okay, is my deepest desire to live a life of Christ likeness? Well, then now let's look at your life that you've achieved a lot of the thresholds of young adulthood that you want to achieve, but is your life moving in the deeper purpose? Because if it's not, what I've seen a lot of young adults in their late 20s and 30s is trying to relive the young adulthood of life is fire and passion and full of possibilities. And so I don't want to be shackled with these responsibilities anymore.
Right.
I want to experience the thrill and freedom of young adulthood again. And I have to ask, is that what you really want?
Right.
Because if we take all the decisions you're making now and fast forward 20 more years, will you look back and go, yeah, I'm so glad I did that? Chances are you're going to go, I regret that.
Yep.
And it's hard in the moment because what you really want is to feel skinny again. You want to feel like you're attractive, or you want to feel strong. You want to feel powerful. You want to feel free. And it's not your deepest desires. Those are your strongest desires right now.
So what we want matters. It affects more than what we realize. And we have to be willing to let our wants and our desires be set up on the altar and let Jesus come in and say, you know what, you may want that, but that's not what's best for you.
Yeah.
Let's unlock that deepest desire, because the beautiful thing about partnership with Jesus, partnership with the Holy Spirit, is not only does he want what's best for us, he also is willing and able to put those desires in us.
Yeah.
And when we partner with him in fellowship, in prayer, in intimacy with Jesus, you delight yourself in the Lord, and he gives you the desires of his of your heart. He places those desires in your heart for him. Like there's that the most deepest part of us desires to be with God, desires to experience him, to feel that sense of connection to our Creator. Like that is the deepest level of what we want. And if we're honest with ourselves about that, and we recognize that, and we cultivate and stir that desire, he's there to meet us in that moment. And so as we kind of close out this episode today, the admonition and encouragement is, to take some time to get out some paper and pen, journal, write out what you want. You may be surprised by what comes out if you just sit down and be honest with yourself. And this isn't an exercise of okay, well, whatever you want, that's what you get. It's a recognition of where do these desires come from, and try to go to a deeper level of understanding what is underneath that immediate craving, what is beneath that strong desire, and what's really at the core of who you are, what you want. What do you want out of life?
Yeah.
Who do you want to be? What do you want to become? These are the kind of questions that are uncomfortable, but lead to transformation over the long haul.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. That's good. That's a good summary.
There we go. What do you want? And we'll leave you with that. Let us know what you want. leave a comment, leave a review. What we want is for you to review and rate this podcast. Let us know that you're listening. We love getting to hear from our listeners. I ran into somebody in Broken Bow who I'm going to give him a shout out. His name's James Brown. It's very easy to remember that name.
Yep.
And it was really cool to get to meet him. He was telling me about listening to the podcast. And so,
That's cool.
if you're listening, I'm giving you a shout out. Thanks,
James.
Thanks for listening. All right. Well, that brings us to the end. We'll see you guys on the next one. Have a blessed day.